If you need to generate documents from your Airtable, this video is for you. I'm going to be walking you guys through 3 different levels of document generation from data within Airtable. The first level, we're going to be using certificates as an example, which is a level where essentially we're just plugging in data, no real complexity with it. Level 2, a tiny bit more complex because we're going to be bringing in some AI generated text. So we're going to be using, in my case, I'm just going to use the OpenAI platform to just generate some text, and we're going to be using a proposal. So we're going to be generating client ready proposals. And the final thing we're going to be generating, the final level, are spec sheets. And this is a bit more complicated because essentially we're going to have a variable amount of data which we want to drop into the spreadsheet, and we're also going to be throwing some images in there. Cool. Let's get into it. Cool. We're going to start with level 1, the certificates. But before that, I just want to run you guys through kind of the mental model for this. Let's hop into Whimsical here, and I'll just add Claude generate me a little diagram. And essentially this is how I'm thinking about it, or this is how you should think about it. Literally this pattern repeats over all levels, but there's some sort of trigger. So within Airtable, where we could either be a record changes, or I like to use buttons just because it's a bit more deliberate. And then we're essentially going to pull that data that we need. We're going to push that into our template. We're going to be using Google Docs for the first 2 levels. Well, all the levels actually. And then we are going to be either delivering it, dropping it back into the drive, and essentially writing that back to Airtable and giving that feedback that it's been finished. This repeats across all the different levels. All right, let's start off with the first level. So I've got my document here, and you can see already these are the templates that we're going to be filling in, and we're going to be pulling this in from our Airtable base. Cool, I'm going to hop into make.com, create a new scenario. And this is going to be triggered by webhook. I want to do it by buttons. So just going to create a webhook. Now it's giving us our webhook, and it's already listening for data for the structure. I'm just going to grab this and hop into Airtable and create my automation because I want to do this by button. I'm just going to hop into Airtable here, and we're going to create a script. Should have this in my ISP. Here we go. And essentially all we're doing is, it's just a simple script. It's just making an HTTP request in JavaScript to our webhook. So I'm going to copy that in. Oh. And then make sure I've set up the input variable, which is going to be record ID as well. So this trigger is not set up, so it doesn't have the record ID. So I'm just going to come in to here, since there's no button, and the button needs to be in the UI. Just to make it easier, because I don't want to create an interface, I'm just going to change this to when the record matches a condition. Let me change our record, and then we're just going to, when status is pending generation. So when I change the status to pending generation. And then now I can come into a record ID and just click that Airtable record ID. Trigger certificate creation. I'm going to turn that on and I'm going to test this. Let's just go into my data and make sure, to be fair, I think I can just test it from here. There we go. Nope, still needs the record ID. So I'm going to go into my data, and what I'm going to do is just set a specific record just into pending generation. And then test that. As you can see, that's triggered our make.com scenario. I can save that, and this is the starting point. Now we're all good with this automation. Now what I'm going to do is essentially finish off the rest of this. You just name it. Cool. So like I said, the pattern is the same. We trigger, gather, and render. So let's get that information from Airtable. And what I'm going to do, because in Airtable, what I'm actually sending is the record ID. So I'm just going to grab that record directly, just because I'm getting sent the record ID. Just drop that in there. I'm just going to test it out really quickly. And just copy this record ID to test. You can see we've been able to get our data. I'm just going to rename this or certificate. I believe the certificate. Cool. Next thing we want to do is render. So we're going to have this template. So we're going to use Google Docs to create this certificate from a template. So we're going to use the create a document from template module. And let's find this. Perfect. Cool. Now you can see, oh, yeah, I put the wrong template. It's the certificate of completion. And you can see we can just fill these in. So participant name, course, completion date as well. Spell. Certificate, that's definitely one of those words you look at for too long and it just becomes weird. And I'm just going to keep it in my root. Cool. We save that. And then we could actually test this out. Let's go for today. So that should generate a new document. Just grab the link. And there you can see. Now, obviously, this date format isn't amazing. So we're just going to go in there and change that. And we can just use format date, drag that in there if it wants to go. And I'm a DD. Well, of course, I'm a DDMMYY man. There you go. Cool. Now, last final thing, according to our model, you can email it, drop in the drive. This is kind of already being done in this module. Since we can choose where it goes in the drive. And I'm just going to write the link back. You could turn this into a PDF. So I could just download the document. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm actually going to download it and then upload it to Airtable as well. Cool. Now let's just add that to Airtable. This can be the record ID from our first module. It's the same one from the webhook. And the only thing we're updating is okay, so I'm going to add the web view link. And just test if it actually downloads. Oops. Let's dive into Airtable. I can see it hasn't updated. So that's telling me that we can't directly download it. Cool. So following along our model, after we've generated our document, we can just essentially just update our Airtable base and add the Google Doc link to the record, and then we're done. So I'm just going to add the record ID, and the only thing I really want to change is I want to add the certificate URL, and that's just going to be web view link, and then make sure the status is set to generated, and then make sure I update the date as well to generate that. And that's everything that we would want to change here. Cool, so we could run this end to end. If I just turn it on, and then go back to Airtable, and let's just generate Callum's certificate. So what's going to happen is triggering our webhook. It's going to get our data, create our template, and add it back to Airtable. As you can see, open that up. We've got Callum's certificate. Cool. Now, the next type of the next level, we're going to be creating proposals. So I've got, again, another table of data that you'd want to kind of throw in a proposal. And we've got our input fields. So you can imagine that we might be filling in a proposal form, and company, industry, and then what we're going to generate our AI outputs from are these inputs. So these are our inputs, and our AI outputs will be kind of an executive summary, why us, our approach, and then the actual proposal doc and URL, or just the URL. And kind of the same thing generated out. Cool. So what I can actually do is create a brand new scenario. Again, almost exactly the same. It's listing now, and we're just gonna duplicate our automation here. And just reconfigure it. Might need to change these. Yep. So I'm going to go in here and just change status to, I'm just going to add one, pending generation. And then we're just going to add our own new webhook. Copy that in. Replace it. Check everything's all right with the record ID. But we could just throw in the test now. Nothing matches. Let me just go into data. And I'm going to shoot off our request into our make scenario. There you go. We've got our record ID. Cool. So let's start building our scenario. Again, literally going to be the same structure, except this time we're just going to be throwing in our AI modules to generate our output. Cool. So we're going to have to get all of that proposal data. And cool. Let's generate our AI outputs. So we've got essentially 3 outputs here: the executive summary, why us, and our approach. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to generate these separately. Oops. I'm actually going to generate these separately because having it all in one prompt kind of makes it a bit annoying to iterate on. Specifically, if the exec summary, we don't like it, we want to change it, we'd have to change the whole prompt if they're all in one. Whereas you might be happy with the why us, we might be happy with the approach, but then having to change the whole prompt is just not efficient. It might mess up everything else. Cool. So I'm just going to use OpenAI. This. And we're just going to use a generated response. Let's go for GT Luna. And right, let's set up this prompt. Cool. So for our prompt, we need our inputs essentially. So the company, industry, problem statement, obviously the tools, and we're just gonna write a prompt. And nice and simple. So let's go for our executive summary. Cool, I've just had AI generate me a few prompts instead of doing it manually. And we're just going to plug in our inputs. So obviously the client, the company, the industry, the actual problem statement, and then the scope notes for what we'll build. Leave the timeline as well. And yeah, just a simple text prompt. Nothing fancy. Essentially, that's all we need. A simple, just one-shot text generation. And then for the approach, And then finally the timeline. We're gonna plug the timeline in as well. Now, having AI just output bullets can be hit or miss. We'll leave it for now. We'll test it. Let's test our. So you got the company. Just type in logistic. The actual problem statement. Our scope threads. And then finally the timeline. And it shouldn't take too long because it's a text generation, you can see. Rephrase services currently relies on drivers competing. I'm okay with that. Next thing is the approach. These are the strip notes, yep. Or tools. Add timeline. Let's have a look at the approach, the output. Nice, that's okay. And then the final one. Which is going to be the YOS. Problem statement. And then finally tools again. Again, nice and simple. Let's test that out. Oops. Don't even get the problem statement. No. Industry we know, statistics. Oops. See what we get. Cool. I'm happy with that. Same as before, let's just get our document generation and create a document from template. But now we're going to be feeding in the outputs from AI. Cool. You can see our variables. So let's plug in these in. My name, go to industry. There we go. Cool. So now we can plug in our AI outputs, drop the results into there. And then finally the Y us. Scope notes again. With tools, we kind of know it's an array, so we should rejoin it on something. Tools. And then we're just going to join it by a comma and a space. And price, just add a random price. There you have it. Again, I'm just going to put the root for the test. Now let's do a test all the way through. Oops, I pressed it a load of times. It's the most recent one. And we can open up the proposal. There you go, not too bad. Now, there are some formatting bits that we could get a bit of. So for example here, you probably want the sign. But the structure is the main thing that we care about, essentially. We're triggering, gathering, adding or rendering, and then writing back to Airtable. Okay, so let's have a look at the final level, which is going to be our spec sheet. Going to repeat the same structure as before. You just move my face out of the way, and then we click. So back in Airtable, I'm gonna duplicate our automation. Then I'm gonna rename it spec sheet creation. Make sure to just drop the correct webhook in here. Pending generation. So when the status is pending generation, that's when it's gonna trigger the creation of the spec sheet. So if I run that test, let's come through it again. Okay, cool. So we need to fetch our record. Make sure we kind of just test that quickly. Everything looks cool. We've got a vendor. Oh, but I don't see our products on there. I'm just going to quickly add the products. And just make sure the vendor is the same, so you can only select vendors. Vendors you can only select products which belong to the vendor that you've selected. So for example, I only see the halberd trade supply vendor products. Let's just select a few random ones. Let's just make sure that this is the formula. Hate an AI description. Probably the probably the thing I hate most about working with AI sometimes. Cool. So we've got a spreadsheet. I've set up the data structure correctly, I believe. Now this is our template. Now we're going to be using we're not going to be using Google Docs for this final advanced. We're going to be using a tool called Carbone. Documentera and Carbone are similar. I like Carbone just because it's got a pretty generous free tier for generating documents. I think you get 100 in a month, which is a lot. But if we go to the docs here, it uses a template language. So essentially, in our simpler templates, we were just literally inserting a tag with whatever the name of our template was, our template tag was. Here with Carbone, it's a little bit more advanced because we can do a whole load of different things. For example, sorting. A little bit later on, I'm going to be showing you looping, or essentially just creating a variable amount of outputs. And this is what it looks like. What I'm going to do is create a template. Oops. And I already have essentially this template, so I'm just going to download this and use this. So I can just drag that in. And it can even help you kind of like generate that first test. So you can kind of see what it would look like. Cool. Now, that target scenario, now that we've got info, I'm going to use the Carbone app. And in fact, although I've got my spec sheet, I might actually need to make another get record call to get my products. Let me just have a look at what Carbone gives us first. Pardon me. So we've got our Carbone module here. We need to select our template. Let me make sure I save this. Give it a name. So back into here. There we go. We've got a spec sheet. Now, the data set that needs to go into here. Let's close all of these. Now, we're using JSON, so we need to get our product data into JSON. So we're actually going to have a step where we kind of transform this into JSON. Cool, so we need to generate our JSON. Now, this is the structure that we've been given. And what we can do is plug in our Airtable variables. So for example, the vendor name and all the product details. Now, as I was saying before, we don't have this available on our spec sheet. So what I'm going to do is just cool. So what we're going to do is get our spec sheet. Now on our spec sheet, we've got linked records to our products. So what we're going to do is go through each one, put them into an array, and then we're just going to drop that array into Carbone, since our structure for our products is an array of product objects. Okay, so here's where we are. Once we have our spec sheet, what we're going to do, because of our data structure, we've got products as linked records on our spec sheet, and we want to get all the details for every single product. So what we're going to do is we're going to iterate through the products array, which is on the spreadsheet. So we're going to go one by one through the products which are linked to this spec sheet. And then we're just going to get all the data from that specific product. And you can see in the array aggregator, what we're doing is, so we start with an array of just, if I go into the spec sheet, and if I just run this, the most recent, you can see on our, okay, no, that's the course. Let me grab a record ID. There we go. So that is a product, not a spec sheet. Cool. So on this spec sheet, you can see we have an array of products, and it's just the record IDs. And just to understand this little bit here, all we're doing is we're saying, okay, let's go through this array one by one. And for every one, we are searching using that record ID. And every time you search for a product, so if I just, that's my email, not a product. If I just quickly search and get that product record, every time you search, it's going to give us everything back. And what we're doing with this array aggregator is we're just choosing the specific properties that we want in our final array. So the array, we're going to go from essentially an array of record IDs to an array of objects which have every single property of our product. Cool. And then one of the cool things of AI is essentially basically the I can't even say the word, the democratization of code. So I've just quickly asked Claude to just generate me some code, some JavaScript that's going to turn our input, so our array of products, as well as our vendor data into the final JSON structure that we need here. And let me just walk you guys through the code really quickly. It's nothing too complicated. Essentially what we're doing is, first of all, we've got some type checking. So we're checking if the data that we're inputting is the expected type that we want. And then I'll skip the photo bit, but all we're doing is we're saying, hey, okay, cool. We're making sure that it's a string. This string function, all it's doing is checking if it's a string, and if it's not a string, or if it is a string, we're making it a string. If it's not a string, we're making it a string. And if it is a number, we're making it a number. Is that what we're doing? No. Okay, cool. Here's what we're actually doing. So this string function essentially just turns something into a string, and the number function does the same thing. So essentially we're just making sure that our widths end up as numbers. So all the properties which should be numbers end up as numbers, and all the properties which should be strings end up as strings. Cool. So yeah, with our vendor name, that's just an input. We're just essentially making sure that's a string. Now with our product stuff, you can see this rows.map. Now what we're doing is essentially we're saying that for every product, we're going through our product array one by one. And from that product array, we're just taking the specific property that we need in this specific object. So for this SKU, this is what it appears, how it's named in Airtable. And essentially we're just pulling that out and just adding it to our property. Cool. So I'm going to close that and then have a look. So you can see that we don't have our vendor stuff. So I need to pull in our vendor stuff. In this specific case, this is a vendor spec sheet, so all the products belong to that vendor. However, you can imagine that if we were sending this to, for example, a client, not a vendor, then for every product, we would get the specific vendor because the spec sheet could have products from different vendors. There you go. Just test that really quickly. You can see we got our vendor all good. And we just got to make sure that's inputted into our code module inputs. Contact name, contact email. That's there. Do we have a contact name? There we go. I don't really have a valid until. We'll need that. But yeah, that's about it. What I'm going to do is test this all the way through, apart from actually generating our doc. So I'm just going to run that once. Go into Airtable. to just test everything. So that should shoot off into make. Or maybe not. What's gone wrong? We'll just test it. It's going to test both anyway. Or is it? Cool. So let's have a look at our code output. Cool. So you can see we've got everything we want on the first level of this object. We've got our vendor stuff, and then we've got our 3 products, and we've got all the details for every single detail for each product. Cool, that looks good. And essentially now I can just plug that straight in. I'm just gonna have a look at what it's like, the raw output. Yeah, perfect. Cool, we're gonna run that again. And we're missing something. Has to be a string, so it looks like okay, cool. So our data you set up as a string. However, so you can see each of these are strings, but what it actually should be is it should be numbers essentially. So what I'm gonna do, just change these to numbers. I hope that solves the problem. Okay, so what I've done to fix this, I've changed the code. So before we were, like I mentioned, we were kind of setting the values of our properties that should be numbers as numbers, but it doesn't really matter because they're going inside of a document anyway. So whether they come out as a string or a number doesn't matter. We're not doing any calculations or anything. It's not going inside of a spreadsheet. It's just going inside of a docx file. So everything is a string now. It should be accepted. Everything is a string, which is just text. Let's just make sure. Value has to be a string. Cool. Seems like something's still not coming out as a string. So let's have a look at the code again. Cool, so the problem might just be that we need to make sure that our output is JSON. Normally I would actually do this in the code, but we can just do it with the make.com step as well and just make sure it's a JSON string. And let's test that out, see if that fixes our problems. Cool. Yeah, so it has fixed our problems. Great. Now, we've generated our document. We might as well store it somewhere. So we can download it, or we could actually, I think we can just upload it straight to Airtable if we've got an attachment field already. Let me just double check. Yeah, let's just add a little attachment field. Just gonna refresh that. So we actually don't have the URL, and it looks like Airtable always asks for the URL. So what I'm gonna do is just use Drive, add it to my Drive, and then add that URL to Airtable. Thanks. Wrong module. All right, I'm going to log in. Just going to put out my root. And then from here, we should be able to add it to Airtable. Just want to make sure I'm giving it the right URL. We can try the web view, the web content link. Save that. So I added the file name. Dann immer added file name and carbon. Again, no file name. Let's just map it, make sure it's right. Oh, okay. Because the file name isn't actually there. For that run, what I'm just going to do is just make it manual. Or hard code it. Just for our test. Well, yeah. Cool. So the final thing I'm going to do is, instead of adding the generated file drive link as opposed to trying to download the file. After that, that should be the final kind of step in our workflow. And we can just double check it in Airtable. These two would have the spec sheet. Oh. With the test key, you can only convert in the following format, PDF. Cool, it looks like it's a limitation of document error. I'm just going to change that to convert to PDF. I'll let you guys choose. And there we go. So go from our template of a product specification sheet to our final output here, where essentially we filled in all the specifications. We've got our unique images and obviously our unique project specifications. Cool. Thanks a lot for listening, guys, and see you in the next one. Cheers. Bye.